Welcome to another episode of the Unwind with Me podcast. And this week I am going to be reading from the Golden Maiden and other folk tales from Armenia. So we're moving over to an entirely different continent this week. The Golden Maiden. Once upon a time, there was a wicked widow who had an ugly daughter. She married a second husband who had a beautiful daughter and a son by his first wife. The stepmother hated the two motherless children and used every means to persuade her husband to take them away to the mountains and abandon them as prey to wild beasts. The poor man loved his children, but being frail, was unable to resist the frequent importunities and threats of his wife. Therefore, one day he put bread in a bag and, taking the two children, went to the mountains. After a long journey, they came to a lonely wilderness. The man said to the children, "Sit here and take a little rest." And then, turning his face away, he began to sob bitterly. Father, why are you weeping?" exclaimed the children, and they also began to weep. The man opened the bag and gave them bread, which they soon ate. "Father," said the boy, "I am thirsty." The man drove his stick into the ground and, placing his cloak over the stick, said, "Come, children, sit here under the shadow of this cloak. I will go and see if there is a fountain nearby." The children seated themselves under the cloak while their father disappeared behind the trees and rocks. After waiting a long time, the two innocent children grew tired and began to ramble about in search of their father, but in vain. "Father, father," they exclaimed, but only the echo of the mountains returned them answer, "Father, father." The children came back crying, "Alas, alas, the stick is here, the cloak is here, but father is not here." Thus they cried for a long time, but seeing that nobody appeared, they rose up, and one of them took the stick and the other the cloak, and they began to wander about in the wilderness, not knowing where to go. After a long ramble, they came to a place where some rainwater had gathered on the ground in a print made by the hoof of a horse. "Sister," said the little boy, "I am thirsty. I want to drink of this water." "No," said the maiden, "do not drink of this water. As soon as you drink of it, you will become a colt." Soon they came to another print made by the hoof of an ox, and the boy said, "Sister, I am thirsty. I want to drink." But she would not let him drink, saying, "As soon as you drink of this water, you will become a calf." Then they came to another print made by the paw of a bear, and the boy wanted to drink, but his sister prevented him lest he should become a cub of a bear. Then they came to a track made by the foot of a pig, and the boy again wanted to drink, but the maiden prevented him lest he should turn into a young pig. Soon they came to a print made by the foot of a wolf, but the boy did not yield till they came to one made by the foot of a lamb. "Sister," he exclaimed, "I am thirsty. I cannot wait any longer. I will drink from this at any risk." "Alas," said the maiden, "what can I do? I am ready to give my life to save you, but it is impossible. You will turn into a lamb the moment you drink of this water." The boy drank and was at once changed into a lamb and began to follow his sister, bleating. After a long and dangerous journey, they found the way to the town and came to their house. The stepmother was angry to see them come back, though one of them was now but a lamb. As she had great influence over her husband, he used every means to please her. One day she said to him, "I want to eat meat. You must kill your lamb that I may eat it." The sister, hearing this, at once took her lamb brother and fled secretly to the mountains, where, sitting on a high rock, she spun wool while the lamb grazed safely near her. As she was thus spinning, Her spindle fell suddenly from her hand and was precipitated into a deep cave. The maiden, leaving the lamb grazing, went down to find her spindle. Entering the cave, she was surprised to see an old fairy woman, a dame 1,000 years of age, who, perceiving the maiden, exclaimed, "Maiden, neither the bird with its wing nor the snake on its belly can enter here. How could you venture to come hither?" The terrified maiden was at a loss for an answer, but she replied with a gentle voice, "Your love brought me here, grandmother." The old fairy was pleased with this kind answer, and calling the maiden, gave her a seat beside herself and inquired of her many things concerning the upper world. The more she talked with the maiden, the better she liked her, and she said, "Now you are hungry. Let me bring you some fishes to eat." She went into the cave and returned with a plate full of cooked snakes, at the sight of which the maiden shuddered with horror and began to weep. "What is the matter?" inquired the old dame. "Why are you weeping?" "Nothing at all," answered the maiden shyly. "I remembered my dead mother, who was so fond of fish, and therefore I wept." Then she told the old dame her sad story and the ill treatment of her wicked stepmother. The fairy woman was very much interested in what the maiden told her and said to her, "Be seated and let me sleep in your lap. In yonder fireplace there is a plowshare heated in the fire. When the black fairy passes, do not waken me, but when the red and green fairy passes, at once press the red-hot plowshare on my feet, that I may awake." The poor maiden shuddered with fear, but she could do nothing but consent. Accordingly, the old fairy woman lay down in the maiden's lap and slept. Soon a fairy as black as night passed through the cave, but the maiden did not stir. After him, the red and green fairy appeared, and the whole cave was gilded with his radiant beams. The maiden at once pressed the red-hot plowshare on the feet of the sleeping fairy woman, who immediately started up, exclaiming, "Oh, what is biting my feet?" The maiden told her that nothing had bitten her, but it was the red-hot plowshare she felt, and that it was time to get up. The old dame arose and at once caused the maiden to stand up as the red and green fairy proceeded, whose gleaming rays had such an effect upon her that her hair and garments were all turned to gold, and she herself was turned into a fairy maiden. After the red and green fairy disappeared, the maiden, kissing the fairy woman's hand, took leave of her, and taking her lamb brother went home. Seeing that the stepmother was not at home, she at once took off her golden garments and, hiding them in a secret corner, put on her old rags. Soon the stepmother entered, and seeing the golden hair of the maiden, exclaimed, "How now, little elf? What did you do to your hair to turn it into gold?" The maiden told her what had taken place. On the following day, the stepmother sent her own daughter to the same spot. There, on purpose, she let her spindle fall and entered the cave as if to pick it up. The fairy woman saw her, and taking a dislike to her, changed her into an ugly thing, so ugly that it is impossible to describe her appearance. She came home, and the stepmother, seeing her own daughter changed into a form of so great ugliness, was the more enraged against the two stepchildren. One day, the prince of that country sent out heralds to proclaim all over his realm that his son was to be married, and that the most beautiful maiden in all the land shall be his bride. He commanded all the marriageable maidens to assemble in the palace courtyard where the young prince would make his selection. At the appointed time, all the maidens of the land had crowded into the courtyard. The stepmother dressed her own daughter in the best garments and ornaments she could procure, veiling her ugly face very carefully, however, and took her to the courtyard, hoping that the prince would select her for his bride. In order to prevent the orphan maiden from appearing before the prince, the stepmother scattered a measure of wheat in the yard and bade the maiden to pick up the wheat before she returned, threatening to beat her to death in case she failed to finish the task. Soon after the stepmother went away, however, the maiden let loose the chickens, which in a moment picked the wheat up to the very last grain. And she, putting on her golden garments, was changed to a fairy maiden so beautiful that she might say to the sun, "Sun, you need not shine, for I am shining." Then she went to the prince's courtyard, where she was the object of the admiration of all the crowd. But she could not stay very long, lest her stepmother should return first, and not finding her at home, should beat her upon her return. So she ran hastily back, and hiding her golden garments, put on her old rags. But in her haste she had dropped one of her golden slippers in the prince's fountain. Soon the young prince, who had looked at the maidens without making a selection, came on horseback, leading his animal to the fountain to water him. But the horse was frightened by the radiant beams from the slipper. The servants immediately entered the fountain, and taking out the slipper, gave it to the prince, who seeing it at once declared that the maiden who wore that slipper should be his bride. He and his peers began to search every house and to try the feet of the maidens to find the true owner of the slipper. They had just approached the house of the Golden Maiden when the stepmother took her and hid her in the great kitchen pit, which is used as a furnace, presenting her own ugly daughter as the owner of the golden slipper. Of course, the slipper did not fit. As the prince and his peers were leaving the house, the cock flying from his roost perched on the top of the door and cried, "Googly, googly, goo! The Golden Maiden is in the pit." The pit was immediately opened, and lo, the maiden jumped out. The slipper fitted, and the maiden, taking out her golden garments and the mate of the slipper from the corner where she had hid them, put them on, and was changed to a fairy maiden. The prince, seeing this, embraced her as his bride. Taking the lamb brother with them, they went to the prince's palace, where their nuptials were celebrated for 7 days and 7 nights. One day, the stepmother took her own daughter and went to the prince's palace to pay a visit to her stepdaughter, who conducted them to the prince's orchard for a walk. As they came to the seashore, the stepmother said, "Come, daughters, let us take a bath in the sea." No sooner had they entered the sea than the stepmother, intending to drown the golden bride, pushed her into the deep water. A great fish, however, chanced to be there and swallowed her. The stepmother at once gathered up the golden dresses of the bride, and putting them on her own ugly daughter, brought her to the palace. There she left her in the palace of the golden bride, veiling carefully her ugly face. The true bride remained in the belly of the fish for several days. One day, very early in the morning, she heard the sexton ringing the bell and inviting the people to church. She cried to him from the belly of the fish, "Sexton, sexton, who ringing your morning bell, crossing your face, send the devils to hell. For God's sake, go to the young prince and tell, let him not kill my lamb brother or sell." The sexton, hearing this call repeated several times, went and informed the young prince, who had by that time discovered the loss of his fairy bride. He immediately came to the seashore, where the sexton had heard the voice. Once more it was repeated, and the prince recognized it as the voice of his bride. He drew his sword and leaped into the sea. Splitting the fish's belly, he drew out his bride, and taking her in his arms, brought her to the palace. Soon he called the stepmother before him, saying, "Now, kind mother, which gift do you prefer, a nimble-footed horse or a keen sword?" "Let your keen sword stab your enemies," answered the stepmother, overjoyed with the expectation of a valuable present. "I will have the nimble-footed horse." "I take you at your word," said the prince. "You shall have the horse." He ordered his men to bind the stepmother and her ugly daughter to the tail of a wild horse. It was done, and the horse, being whipped, carried the two wicked women away to the mountains. They were thrown from stone to stone and from tree to tree until they were dashed into pieces. The wicked persons being punished, the prince celebrated a new nuptial for 40 days and 40 nights because he had found his lost golden bride. She, being released from her rival, thenceforth enjoyed a happy life with her lamb brother. 3 apples fell from heaven, one for me, one for the storyteller, and one for him who entertained the company. The next story is also an Armenian folktale. It's titled The Betrothed of Destiny. Once upon a time, the king of the West had a son who one night dreamed a dream in which destiny betrothed him to the daughter of the king of the East. In the morning he awoke, and lo, the betrothal of the maiden was on his finger. The betrothal ring of the maiden was on his finger. On the very same night, the same dream had come to the sleeping maiden, who on the morrow found on her finger the betrothal ring of the son of the king of the West. The lad at once started to find his betrothed, and after a long journey, came to the city of the king of the East. He entered into the service of the king as a stranger because he could not make himself known on account of the continuous strife existing between his father and the king of the East. He served the king 7 years, during which he spent many happy hours with the young princess, his betrothed. At the expiration of the 7 years, he asked the hand of the princess as his remuneration for his services. The king, who was pleased with the lad, consented to give him his daughter in marriage. But the lad said he must take her to his country, where the wedding should take place. The king consented to that also, and let his daughter go, giving her a precious dower. On their way to the country of the king of the West, they had to cross the sea, and so went on board a ship. The captain, being a wicked man, was charmed by the beauty of the maiden, and before the ship sailed, he sent the lad ashore, bidding him to make further preparation, as the voyage would probably be long on account of contrary winds. As soon as the lad disappeared, the captain weighed anchor and set sail. The lad came back only to find that the ship had sailed away with his love on board. There remained nothing for him to do but to lament and bewail his ill luck. The maiden, who was in the cabin, did not discover the truth until it was too late. To her censure and upbraiding, the vile captain answered with the proposal that she should become his wife. "I marry you, such an ungracious beast as you?" she exclaimed. "I would rather make my grave in the unfathomable sea." But the captain was strong, and they were on the open sea where no help could be expected. Seeing that she could not resist force if the captain resorted to it, she resolved to use craft. "Well then," she said finally, "I will be your wife, but not upon the sea. We will go home to your city and there be married lawfully." The captain consented, and they soon reached the city. "Now do you go first," said the maiden, "and make preparation. I will wait here until you return." Without suspicion, the captain went ashore. As soon as he had disappeared, the maiden bade the sailors weigh anchor, and she set sail without knowing where to go. At last she reached a certain city and cast anchor. The king of that city was a young lad of marriageable age who was celebrating his wedding festival. 39 beautiful maidens were already elected. Only one maiden was missing to complete the number 40, from among whom he would choose his queen, while the others were to become handmaids to the queen-elect. The king, hearing that a beautiful maiden had come to the haven, hastened thither, and seeing the princess, said to her, "Fair maiden, come Come, and by your presence complete the number 40. You are the jewel of all the maidens, and will surely be my dear queen, while the rest shall become your handmaids." "Very well, I will come," answered the princess. "Only send hither your 39 maidens, that I may come to your palace with great pomp." The youthful king consented and sent his maidens on board the ship. As soon as they came, the princess weighed anchor and set sail. She told the 39 maidens who she was and asked them to accompany her until Destiny showed them what to do. The maidens were fascinated by her beauty and commanding appearance and promised to follow her wherever she went, even to the end of the earth. After sailing for a long time, they came to an unknown shore where there was a castle. They cast anchor, and all the party landed. Entering the castle, they found it in 40 rooms with a bed in each, all richly decorated. The castle contained great wealth and abundant food. Satisfying their hunger, they went to bed, each maiden occupying a chamber. In the middle of the night, the door of the castle suddenly opened, and there entered 40 brigands, who were the owners of the stronghold, and who were just returning from a nightly foray, bringing with them great booty. "Aha!" exclaimed the brigands, seeing the maidens. "We hunted elsewhere, and lo, the antelopes have come to our own home." "Enter, you brave heroes," said the maidens. "We were waiting for you." And they pretended to be very much pleased to see the brigands, who entered the rooms occupied by the maidens without suspicion. When they had laid down their arms and retired to rest, each maiden took the sword of the brigand who lay in her room and cut off his head. Thus the maidens were the owners of their wealth and property. In the morning the maidens rose, and putting on the clothes and arms of the robbers, appeared as youthful knights. They mounted the brigands' horses, taking in their saddlebags gold, silver, jewels, and other portable wealth. After a long journey, they came to the city of the king of the west, and encamped in a meadow on the outskirts of the city. Soon they heard a herald crying that on the following day there should be elected a king of the realm, for inasmuch as the late sovereign had died and the heir apparent was lost, it was necessary to choose a new ruler. On the following day, all the people of the realm were gathered in the park adjoining the palace. The 40 strangers also went to gratify their curiosity. Soon the nobles let loose the royal eagle, which flapped its wings and soared over the immense crowd, as though searching with its keen eyes for the true candidate for the throne. The multitude held their breath and stood stone still. The royal bird once more flapped its wings, and descending from its towering flight, perched upon the head of the princess, who was disguised as a knight. "That is a mistake," exclaimed the noblemen. "We must try it again." Once more they let loose the royal eagle, but again it alighted upon the head of the same stranger. A third trial gave the same result. Thereupon all the multitude saluted the disguised princess, the elect of destiny, exclaiming with one voice, "Long live the king!" And with great pomp they took her and her companions to the royal palace, where the princess was anointed with holy oil and crowned king over the realm, and her companions were made ministers. This new king proved to be the wisest and most just ruler that country had ever enjoyed, and all the people of the realm loved and honored their sovereign with all their hearts. She built a splendid fountain in the midst of the city, on which she caused her image to be carved, so that everyone who came to drink might see it. She put guards to watch the fountain day and night, and said to them, "Watch carefully, and when you perceive a stranger who, on seeing my image, shows signs of knowing me, bring him hither." One day there came a stranger who, after drinking, raised his eyes and saw the image. He gazed for a long time and sighed deeply. Immediately he was arrested and taken to the king, who, looking at him from behind a curtain, ordered him to be imprisoned. This was the captain of the ship. On another day there came another stranger, and he also sighed. It was the king, the owner of the 39 maidens. He was kept in an apartment of the palace, and at last, disguised as a stranger, came the prince, the betrothed of the ruling sovereign, and the heir apparent to the crown. He also looked at the image and sighed, and was taken to the palace. Thereupon, the princess summoned a parliament of all the nobility and the learned and wise men of the realm. She caused the three strangers to be brought before the assembly and told her story from beginning to end. The captain was condemned to be hanged and was executed forthwith. The lord of the 39 maidens received them all, to whose number the princess added one of her most beautiful handmaids, thus making up the 40. The prince and the princess, the betrothed of Destiny, celebrated their wedding with great joy and pomp for 40 days and 40 nights. The prince, as the true heir, was crowned king. His consort became queen, and they reigned together. Thus they reached their desire. May all of us attain our desires and the happiness ordained to us by an all-wise providence. 3 apples fell from heaven, 1 for me, 1 for the storyteller, and 1 for him who entertained the company. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Unwind With Me podcast. Please visit unwindwithme.com to get more information or to contact me. I will be back with another episode next week.